are going to start off with the DBPR issues, unlicensed real estate activity and how to spot it, advertising laws, and some question answers. So we are happy to introduce Sarah Kinney from the Chief Bureau of Enforcement and Brian McAvoy, the investigation supervisor. They're here on the screen. Thank you for talking with us today. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Debbie, thank you so much for inviting us today. It's not often that we get to talk to just a room full of brokers, so we really appreciate this opportunity. And I do have the pleasure of being the Bureau Chief of Enforcement for the Division of Real Estate. And Brian and I work closely together, although we're in different offices this morning. Brian is actually our manager of both our complaint section and our unlicensed activity unit, investigative unit. So Debbie asked us to cover 3 topics with you this morning. And in the few minutes that we have, Brian's going to talk to you a little bit about the complaint section, the unlicensed activity program efforts. And then afterwards, I'll go through the advertising rules of the department, including the more recent team and group advertising rules. And then if you all have a few questions after, we're happy to take a stab at those. Not sure how we'll work through this PowerPoint. Debbie, if you just want me to ask you all to advance the slides, will that work for you? Okay. So one thing I wanted to mention is that at the Division of Real Estate, you know, we're really experiencing this significant growth, I think is probably the best way to mention it. I think as of July 1st, we had nearly or over 415,000 real estate professionals in the state of Florida. And so in the face of this growth, we have this mission critical responsibility, which is to license efficiently and regulate fairly. And as I mentioned, Brian and I within the Bureau of Enforcement kind of work on the regulate fairly side of that mission. And primarily the Bureau of Enforcement is responsible for 2 things. We conduct inspections and audits of brokerage offices and brokerage escrow accounts. And then we analyze complaints that are received at the department and conduct investigations of those complaints. Much of our work does, if you want to advance the slide, much of our work does begin with a complaint. And complaints are filed by consumers, by banks, by government agencies, and you actually licensees file complaints as well. And here I just want to mention again that growth that I was talking about in fiscal year 18-19. I think that we ended that year with about 3,700 complaints. In 2020, so 2021, I should say, which just ended on June 30th of this year, we had received 4,300 complaints. And then just 3 months into this new fiscal year, as of September 30th, we had already received about 1,200 complaints. So I think that we, in all likelihood, will surpass again what we have received in recent years. Without further ado, I see Brian stepped away for just a second. Here he is. So without further ado, he's going to tell you again a little bit more about our complaint section, our complaint processes, and the unlicensed activity unit.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all. Sorry, I had to go adjust the blinds in the back because the sun was starting to peek through a little bit and affect the camera. So our statutory authority comes from Florida Statute 455 and 475. 475 specifically deals with Division of Real Estate law. 455 is more for the department as a whole. And with the 475 statute, we, as Sarah mentioned, we regulate sales associates, brokers, brokerages, appraisers, appraisal management company. We investigate individuals who are engaged in the service of real estate or appraising without having a proper license if they're providing a service that's outlined in some of the definitions within Chapter 475. And it appears that they probably should have a license and they don't, then we may be interested. You can go ahead and move the next slide. So I mentioned 455. Basically, it states that if we receive a complaint and it appears to be legally sufficient, meaning that there's enough information there to suggest that there may be a violation of Florida real estate law, supported by documentation. Most of the time we require, some kind of supporting documentation to go along with the allegation. But if we receive such a complaint, it's in writing, it's signed by the complainant with supporting documentation, then we may send it for investigation. The department, we have the ability to also, a lot of times we receive a complaint, it has to be signed by a complainant, but we can receive and look into complaints that are anonymous if it appears that the information is credible and that there may be public harm or particularly egregious. The allegations are particularly egregious. Go ahead and progress to the next slide, please. So actually, you know what? I think maybe we skipped one. Can we go back one? I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. So most of the time, the complaints, when we receive them, they're confidential. Unless there's probable cause is determined to exist after 10 days. Normally, when you're dealing with a complaint and it's against the licensee, and as you can see in those previous slides, the majority of our complaints that we get deal with licensed individuals. Those complaints will remain confidential throughout the investigation. And then once the investigation is complete and the investigative report is sent to our legal department or our office of general counsel, and the probable cause panel has determined that there may have been a violation of Florida real estate law, then that complaint may be public. Okay, it's no longer confidential. Now, the exception to this is unlicensed activity complaints are public from the get-go. So if we receive a complaint against somebody who's engaged in a service that requires a license, then it's public from the get-go. If somebody were to go and do a public records request of the department and say, hey, can you give me any complaints associated with unlicensed activity pertaining to a certain individual or company, then most likely we would be able to provide that under the fact because it's public. So go ahead and progress to the next slide, please. So as you all know, a real estate broker, is an individual that performs services of real estate. Why this is important is because, especially with unlicensed activity, we look for individuals who are carrying out one of those services as outlined in the definition of broker. I'm not going to get into all the specifics of the definition, but essentially, if you're providing, a service where you're selling, appraising, leasing, or advertising the sale of property for others and for compensation, then you may be required to have a license. Compensation is interesting because technically, if you're providing any of those services to somebody for a steak dinner, then that may be considered compensation and you may be required to have a license. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So anybody who is engaged in the services of real estate without having a valid license or operating as a broker or a sales associate without being the holder of a license may be in violation of statute 475-421A, and that is a third-degree felony here in the state of Florida. So what we do is if we receive a legally sufficient complaint against somebody who is unlicensed, then we initiate an investigation. And when we're done with our investigation and we have created our investigative report, we send our investigative report to our office of general counsel, our legal department, but we also send a copy to the state attorney's office for prosecutorial consideration. So they can look at it and determine whether there may have been a violation. Because it is criminal, they would have to make that determination on the probable cause on the criminal side, and they can follow through and charge the individual for operating as a broker without a license. Go ahead and progress, please. So there are some things that you need to have a license, and there's some things that you can do where you don't need to have a license in the real estate world. Now, this list that I'm about to go over is not all inclusive, but but I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of some of the more popular things that we see. Go ahead and progress it. So as you can see here, some of the things that do require a license: appraising, auctioning, selling real estate, real property, buying real property, and it has to be for others and it has to be for compensation. Okay. With as far as the appraising goes, we're not talking about services that are required under the licenses or certified appraisers. If you're stepping into the side of appraising, then you absolutely must have a appraiser's license. But you as a real estate licensee, if you're providing, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but if you're providing like a CMA, obviously there's certain things that you can do where you're not required to have an appraisal license. But everybody who's engaged in any of these services needs to make sure that they understand what's required of them and what services they're allowed to be providing under Chapter 475 and required in regards to real estate and appraising. So go ahead and progress to the next slide, please. Renting or leasing or attempts to rent or lease real property for another for compensation. Advertising, all of the things I just mentioned, you most likely will need a license. Representing that you're engaged in the business of brokerage activity for compensation. Okay, saying that you're a real estate brokerage or you're a real estate company providing the same services, that would be something that we may want to look at. Undertaking the sale or the advertising of the sale of timeshares when you are not the owner, you're not exempt. You may be required to have a license. Go ahead and progress, please. So some of the things that you may not need a license. So if you're a salaried employee for an apartment complex and you work on site in an office, okay, and you are leasing out apartment units, you may not need a license with the Division of Real Estate. You may be exempt. And all of these exemptions are covered under 475.011, which is the exemption statute. And I believe there's 13 of them. This is just a few of them that we kind of see that are frequent flyers. There's one in particular here that says in the middle, any person or business entity that rents or advertises for rent a public lodging established properly licensed under Chapter 509. What that means is if you are engaged in short-term vacation rentals, okay, and you are properly licensed under Division of Hotels and Restaurants to basically hold a transient occupancy license or a short-term vacation rental license, as we call it, then you may not be required to have a real estate license for providing the leasing of real estate for a short-term vacation rental. All right. But it's going to be very on a case-by-case basis. If we receive a complaint, what we would want to know is, has this person, number one, are they providing a service as outlined in the definition of broker? And if they are leasing under leasing the property, is it considered a short-term vacation rental? And then the next step would be to check with the Department of Hotels or Division of Hotels and Restaurants to see, well, okay, do they have a license with Division of Hotels and Restaurants? Are they covered under that division? And do they meet the exemption statute so that they no longer are required to have a license? And believe it or not, there's a lot of people who think that they're covered. But it really is going to come down to the totality of the circumstances and determine whether they have, followed the right guidelines and the right statutes and administrative code to make sure that they're, in compliance. And of course, there's other situations here where you may not need a license. If you're referring tenants within an apartment complex and you're receiving $50 or less, then you may not need a license. Some people have gotten in trouble where they are referring tenants and they're getting paid $350, $1,000, or they're out there advertising and saying, hey, if you come to me, I'll hook you up with somebody who may be interested in renting this property, and they'll do it for a fee. That may be something that might get you in trouble. So you just need to make sure that you're familiar with the statute, and all this stuff can be found in Chapter 475 of the Florida real estate statute. Next slide, please. So Sarah, do you want to jump into the advertising?
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. One other thing, if I can mention, we always try to when we're speaking with licensees, remind you all that you actually fund the unlicensed activity efforts of the department. Every time you renew your license, you pay $5 from that license renewal goes into what Brian's team does, and that is investigating and ferreting out these individuals who might be practicing real estate without a license. And we encourage licensees, because oftentimes you see things in the field that you think might be questionable, that you are welcome to file a complaint. And it's very simple. You can just go to our website at www.myfloridalicense.com, click up there at the top where it says online services, and then I think it'll be down and to the left, it'll say file a complaint, and you can file right there online, upload your supporting documentation, and Brian's team will have a look at it and see if there is that legal sufficiency that he talked about where we can move forward with an investigation. So we really appreciate your cooperation with that. So on to advertising. You know, I'm sure you all are as familiar with these rules as we are. 61J2-10.025 is a rule that has been around forever. There are newer rules which relate to team and group advertising, which I'll go over in a minute. In most any group that I address, I really encourage the folks there to link again to our website and hook up with where those rules are posted on our website. These rules are very specific, and we receive many complaints on advertising. So 61J2-10.0, well, first of all, let me say 475.25 talks about advertising in general, and it says that advertising should not be in a manner that's fraudulent, false, or misleading. So basically, if you're going to advertise specifics, let's say I'm going to go out there and advertise that I have closed more transactions in Bay County, Florida in 2021 than any other agent out there. I need to make sure that that information is true and it's verifiable. As it gets into the rule 61J2-10.025, it's where we get a little more detailed. And so basically this rule says that if you're going to advertise, you must include the name of the licensed brokerage firm on your advertisement. When I use my personal name in an advertisement, at the very least, I have to use my last name as it's registered with the commission or the department. And so if my name is Sarah Kimmig-Henderson, that means I can advertise as call Sarah Kimmig-Henderson, call Kimmig-Henderson, or call, but I cannot say call Sarah or even call Kimmig, because my last name as registered with the department would be Kimmig-Henderson. And so sometimes, you know, it doesn't happen as much anymore, but I think we got a few cases in recently where a group of licensees had all said, call Bob, call Bill, and no last name. So we do still see those from time to time. And then on internet advertisements, so when the brokerage firm name, when there's a point of contact information listed within your internet advertisement. So any kind of an address, a phone number, a fax number, an email address, anything that can, you know, be a way that a member of the public can get a hold of either the brokerage firm or the licensee, then the brokerage firm name has to appear immediately above, below, or adjacent to that point of contact information. You can advance the slide. 61J2-10.026 is the newer rule that I was talking about. It became effective a little over 2 years ago, and it relates specifically to team or group advertising. And so a team or a group is defined in this rule as a name or a logo that is used by a licensee or a group of licensees who represent themselves to the public as a team or a group within a particular brokerage firm. The rules say that you cannot form a team or a group with licensees from different brokerages. They all have to belong to the same broker or brokerage, or be an employee of the same broker or brokerage. We also have a requirement of the broker has to maintain a written record of the current teams or groups that are under his brokerage. And then within the team or group, there has to be, with each team or group, there has to be a designated person, a licensee, who is responsible for ensuring that their advertising is in compliance. Team or group names can include the word team or group, but they can't include certain words that might suggest that that team or group is a separate brokerage entity. And so some of those kind of no-no words, and I encourage you to go and look this up because there is a long list of those no-no words, but some of them might include things like agency, real estate, realty, even corporation, properties, anything again that's going to give the impression to the public that this team or group might be its own brokerage entity. One thing to remember is that everything that applied in the prior slide about the internet advertisements, the last name, the use of the brokerage firm, all of those also apply to team and group advertising. And then finally, the advertisement containing a team or group name cannot, that team or group name cannot appear in a print that's larger than the name or the logo of the brokerage firm. So if my team name is the Brian Sarah Group and we work for ABC Realty, we cannot have ABC Realty be in teeny tiny letters and then the Brian and Sarah Group be, you know, the entire page. Again, the idea here is not to place a hardship on the licensee as it relates to advertising cost, but it's really about the public, keeping them informed of where that sales associate is employed and just not giving the impression that the team or group is a separate entity. And these rules really speak to both the broker's obligation to supervise these folks and also to remind that sales associate that they have to operate under a broker or a brokerage. So again, as I mentioned, the rules are really specific. If you or your agents advertise at all, you're really going to want to go out there and read these rules. The penalty for violating the team rules, I believe at this point, is a notice of non-compliance, which is kind of like a warning ticket in the traffic world. For advertising in general, the 10.025 rules, that's a citable offense, a $500 fine associated with that. And then any one of these can also lead to an administrative complaint and, you know, further fines. So just keep that in mind when we're thinking about advertising. And also I wanted to mention that I know, I don't know if any of you all attend the FREC meetings. You can also attend virtually. In fact, it's going on as we speak. There is a link on our website to watch those FREC meetings. And it's always really interesting to hear the Real Estate Commission members opine on these cases that come before them. But I also know that they are considering additional rule changes as it relates to advertising. So kind of stay tuned on this. I think they're doing some rulemaking in January, I believe. So before we go into questions, actually, let's see, does anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
With
respect to the group rule, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to the team or group rule, if, for example, a team is wanting to send out like a mailer postcard, and so I've been asked this question before as their broker for the real estate brokerage. If the front of the postcard has the Realty logo and then on the back it has the team logo, is that sufficient, or would both sides of the mailer need to have both the group logo and the brokerage logo?
I can tell you that the rule does not specifically address that. That's not something that's been posed to the commission before. My suggestion would be that err on the side of caution. Probably put the brokerage firm name on both sides, but you can always request a declaratory statement on particular rules and how it might apply to someone's specific practice. It's a little bit of a long process. And because of that, that's why I say you may want to just err on the side of caution. I do know it's, you know, things like advertising on a pin. The commission has felt strongly enough to even state in their meetings before that, oh, well, you know, what if the advertisement, the brokerage firm name and all of that won't fit on this pin if I'm going to advertise my team or group? And their response has been, don't advertise on the pin. So, you know, we have to do what we have to do to kind of meet those obligations that are out there. Any other questions?
I have a question. So when a broker or real estate agent is in process of their license being approved, it's in update, or I can't think of the term exactly, are they allowed to practice prior to that all being approved and valid?
So, well, let's think about if a sales associate, if their license has not been approved, then they would not have a license at all. So I would say no. They need to have a license in order to practice. In the case of a broker, quite possibly they have a sales associate license that they're continuing to operate under through the broker that they're associated with while they're working on getting that broker license approved. So potentially, yes, they could be working.
But unless they have something that says they're valid, until you guys say thumbs up, good to go, they do not practice.
Correct. And really with the paperless licensing, it's my understanding that this is almost instantaneous. There's not that wait time from, a few years back when they had to actually wait for the paper license to get printed and sent to them. Pretty much, once they've applied and passed the exam, it's almost instantaneous that those licenses are issued.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
I'll just say one other thing real quick. Could I just say one other thing real quick?
Sure.
I just wanted to mention that DBPR is interested in business stories. We really take pride in helping Florida businesses flourish. And so we're really interested in giving recognition to businesses that are positively impacting and meeting needs within our communities. So this might include something like a new business with some innovative model, or maybe adapting in some way, during COVID to better serve customers. Maybe there's been a meaningful charity event or an anniversary of the business, something like that. We're interested in what you do and how you serve, and the department would like to help you thrive. And so if you think that you might meet that criteria, we encourage you to, again, link to our website, go all the way down to the bottom, and there's a link that says submit your success story, or you can email us at myrealestate@myfloridalicense.com. Thank you, Brian. myrealestate@myfloridalicense.com. We would love to hear about what you all are doing. Thank you so much for having us today. We appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, thank you.